Please, 7 o'clock. Let's get started. First item on the agenda, approval of the minutes. November 6th, regular meeting, please.
Make a motion to approve the minutes?
I have a motion. I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Done. Oops. Accused? No. Next item under old business. Approval of the reforestation plan and setting of the reforestation cash escrow bond. Major land development, photovoltaic solar energy system, AP4, Lot 25, 10 Main Street, Maxon Hill, LLC, care of Anthony Del Vicario, applicant. Who would like to lead off this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, John Mancy on behalf of the owner and the applicant in regards to the proposal. As the board is very aware, this isn't the first time we've been here. So the issue that remains is essentially the reforestation plan and the reforestation bond. As a brief synopsis, when we were last here, the planning board decided that it would be most efficient to have a peer review of our restoration plan as well as the proposed bond. We were in agreement with that. That has been completed. We have had the opportunity to review the report provided by Crossman Engineering. We don't take issue with regards to the comments concerning the plan. We think that we are in full agreement with the restoration plan. The issue for discussion and determination is the amount of the cash escrow bond. And that is something that we do take issue with, and we'd like to hear a little more from Crossman as to how they came to their numbers. And we would like the board to hear from Mr. Trumley as to how we came to their numbers, because there is a discrepancy here, because there seems to be consent or understanding or approval, if you will, with regards to the plan. The question is the effectuation or build-out of that plan. So for a minimum, we can at least come to an agreement with regards to the plan, but I think there should be more of a discussion as to how we've come to two bookends with regards to the numbers. So we'd like to have that discussion with Crossman and with our engineer.
Okay. Good. Question? So, were you suggesting that you would like to have that discussion at some point in the future?
Well, if we were hoping to have that with Crossman tonight. If he's not here, then what I would do is I would propose the following. I would ask that the board approve the plan, because the plan is the plan. And then the secondary issue is the bond. If there's no dispute over the plan, and your peer reviewer agrees with the layout of the plan and the components of the plan and the species of the plan, then I think we should move forward on that. With regards to the element on the cash escrow bond, what I would suggest is that Crossman engineer meet with our engineer and let the two of them propose a third independent party to review the numbers. I mean, there seems to be some discrepancies as to the implementation of cost implementation of the plan. We agreed at the last hearing to have the peer review of the town, so now you have your report, we have our report. Let's have our two professional registered engineers come up with a third. Independent, the applicant will pay for the review, and I think it's a good way to kind of finally have a very thorough discussion and understanding as to the numbers.
Planning board, what are your thoughts about that strategy?
My thoughts are, Mr. Mancini has said that him and the developer have agreed to all the terms of the reforestation plan that Crossman laid out, and it's, as I understand it, it's just a matter of the amount. And I think his idea of having the two engineers, the two bodies, or parties, I should say, that came up with their prices to justify their costs, and then get back to us on that.
Well, actually, the suggestion was more along the line of a third
Right.
opinion.
Right, but, I mean, I think there needs to be a meeting of the two minds. And if there isn't a consensus of the two minds, then there should be a consensus to appoint a third person. And I'm not saying that needs to be binding on anybody, but it's an opportunity even for the developers looking at it the same way the planning board was looking at it last month to say, how reliable is this number? So my question to Crossman is, how reliable is this number? When my engineer is saying something and we're quite hard. I mean, look, if we were talking 100,000, we could probably come to a consensus, but we're talking a significant amount over the same plan. So we've agreed to what the plan is. It's just a question of applying numbers to that plan.
I kind of like the idea of the third party.
I'm not,
I would only ask, I think your recommendation is good, I would only ask that the town play a role in the selection of
that, I would,
the third party.
I don't have an objection to that. I just would ask that the developer also be given an opportunity to recommend a party. I mean, we can have, so I'll have the.
Let's see if we can agree on who the
Yeah.
third party should be,
Correct,
is what I'm
yeah,
saying.
exactly, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and that's, by the way, that's very common. When there's disagreements with respect to appraisals, seller has an appraisal, buyer has an appraisal, we go and get a third appraisal.
I don't think we should approve the plan tonight though, because obviously there is a huge difference, and even though that on the surface it seems like we're in agreement, I'm not exactly sure that we are, because the whole tree tubes and stakes, I mean, there's an additional 70,000, 100,000, and I saw that in your other plans.
Yeah, it is in the plan.
I get it, but they are very, very different, and so I guess I'm concerned that the plan might need to change, so why, does it matter that we just wait till we get a number?
No, it doesn't. The reason why I posture it that way is because I want the board to understand we're not in disagreement with the plan.
Sure.
And I think that even with respect to the tubing, that was described in the plan. And so, and your report even indicates that the plan is acceptable and is actually well done.
Right.
So if there's another set of eyes to look on the plan, I think it's fair that we have those eyes look at both the plan and the numbers.
Sure.
And that's-
I would say I did notice a difference in terms of Crossman's estimates and yours, and it has to do with the tree shelters. I don't think there was a cost listed for tree shelters, whereas Crossman actually put his number to the deer remediation. So I think there are some differences
Yeah.
that I'm not quite sure were captured in your initial plan.
Yeah.
But that's just I'm not a tree person.
I agree with that, and I think that's why if we can get the two engineers to talk and
Yeah.
they understand how each one came to their methodology, I think there may be some consensus, some movement on our side, perhaps some
Sure.
movement on the town side. May alleviate the need of a third party, but I'd like to have that option open.
Right, absolutely. So I would say that we don't approve it tonight, just for
That's fine.
the cleanness of not having an approved and then an amended and then,
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, it's not because I like continuously to come here, but I think.
Oh, but we love to see you,
But
you know.
but again, we want to do it, we want to make that, we want to do it right.
Sure, absolutely, right.
I agree. I just want to also point out that I noticed some fairly substantial differences, not just in the unit price of some of the items, but the Crossman plan has a much greater term of active management and a much more involved active management line item, which I understand to mean actively checking and monitoring the site and replacing dead seedlings and things like that for a period of time. That's not as explicitly called out in the October 3rd version of the plan. There's a few other things. Slope protection, not discussed or budgeted for in the October 3rd plan, but included in Crossman's estimate. And their estimate and rate and length of time that they've allocated for a forester, a certified forester, to attend to the project is much longer and a higher paid position. So I think I concur with both of you that it warrants the third party looking at it and not approving the plan tonight, because there could be some improvements made based on more eyes looking at it.
You know, and the one thing that we haven't talked about is the soil. And when I went back and looked at our conditions placed upon the zone change, there were a couple of spots, and it wasn't addressed in reforestation, which it was about during construction about the no blasting and all topsoil will remain on site and allow the town's engineer representative to do periodic inspections. So I was thinking, what inspections are we inspecting the soil? What exactly is being inspected? And if by chance there is leaching from these sealed things, should we, as part of the reforestation and making sure that it doesn't turn into a brownfield, have something regarding testing of the soil? Is that somewhere, I think I missed it.
It is. So there's two levels of review.
Right.
There is the periodic review concerning the construction phase. And
And that was the blasting
and
claim.
that's the blasting, but there's more to it. There's also the soil erosion.
Okay,
There's the insurance that the developer's actually following the plans, and there's a review of that. Once the system is plugged in, if you will, then there's monthly maintenance or reports that are produced, and there's a continuing monitoring to ensure that the inverters are well protected, the membrane for the inverters. Remember, we had a
Oh,
very
yeah.
detailed discussion with
Yeah,
regards to that.
right.
And the issue there is, with these reports, is to ensure that everything's in proper maintenance, proper form, and there's nothing on site that, to the eye, shows a deficiency.
sure. Did we specifically state, though, about soil monitoring? I don't ever remember us talking about it, of saying that if by chance, there's something weird going on with these sealed panels and we are getting leaching of whatever, onto our ground one protection aquifer zone, that we don't know. But I wasn't quite sure, and I realize that's late to the party, but I was just thinking about, if we're talking about reforestation and the quality, returning the quality of the land, what check do we have that we're not creating a brownfield with regards to the panels? You know what I mean? That's what I was.
Well, we did, as part of one of the conditions, we also presented Scott Rabbit from Natural Resource Services.
Yeah.
He did a wildlife mitigation narrative, and he
Yeah.
did, in his report, describe the soil.
Okay, but
But I'm
that's
not-
different than
Yeah,
like
yeah,
soil
I don't know.
monitoring.
Yeah, I
And-
agree. I don't think there was anything specific with respect to periodic monitoring or testing of the soil.
Yeah,
And I think that that's covered in the periodic, monthly, or however, I don't remember if it was quarterly or
I think it was
if we did this
yearly.
monthly. I don't remember. Well, let me say this. I do know for a fact that the construction phase of the development has more recurring inspections than once
Yeah.
it's plugged in.
right.
But I do know that the inspections as they happen, if there are issues that are raised, that's when they get addressed.
Right,
They
but
you could require soil testing, whoever inspects it.
yeah,
It's
but
up to-
perhaps,
It's up to whoever inspects it.
yeah, perhaps, I didn't know if that would fall under the whole reforestation in terms of, because you're gonna plant trees, but the soil's contaminated, the trees are gonna die anyways, so.
It kind of ties into, well, I don't have probably here, but the decommissioning conversation is what are the stipulations on that? Does that specify what the soil is supposed to be at the end of the decommissioning or not?
No,
It does.
So somewhere it's not addressed, so either
Yeah.
decommissioning should address it or reforestation.
And your reforestation plan is limited, well, I wouldn't say it's limited, but it's focused to the reforestation when it takes place in 2050.
right, right,
And so at that point, the plan is taking into account that the soils are ready to accept vegetation.
right, and so this goes, that my conversation goes along with that, and making sure that we haven't contaminated the soils to the point that it can't be reforested.
Yeah.
So that's all I was just if we could just sort of add that to this conversation before we accept the plan.
There's another similar element I was thinking about, which is, and it's not explicitly mentioned in the reforestation plan, and it's my understanding there is no actual decommissioning plan for this project per se. It's just an amount of money, but I'm sure we'll get to that later. But there are, retention ponds and drainage ditches and things that are being implemented on the site now, and there's no mention in this reforestation plan that those would be filled or remediated or put back to their natural condition. The reforestation plan assumes that the soil, like you said, is ready to accept vegetation in its current form, so there needs to be, I would think, some provision in one of these plans at the end of the life that, all of these drainage structures, EMPs and things like that are put in to deal with water movement on a paneled site get put back to their natural state.
Well, that's assuming that the property is going to look like it has before you put the solar panels on. Those detention basins may be used for some different type of development, and the reforestation may be of just the solar panels with other types of development. I don't know what development's going to take place in 2050,
Right.
but
No one does, but it's not an
No one does.
argument not to consider these things.
I'm not saying not to. I'm saying keep in mind that in 2050, it's not fair to say that the developer has to reinstate the property to where it was in 2018, because we don't know what 2050 is going to look like. But what we are doing is a restoration plan to restore vegetation to the level as described in the plan.
I just think that this board should consider whether or not we want to require that of the developer.
I don't think so.
Now, I have a question. The project that Board Member Williams brought up, wouldn't that be considered part of the yearly inspection?
I think so.
And not so much at the end, but every year when you go to see something on the ground, an oil spot, a darkening of a certain soil, it would be prudent at that point. Because we've already been guaranteed, if I remember right, the right to go in there once a year and check the site and stuff. So this should be something done constant, not just
But what
at
if
the
you
end.
don't see a dark
Yeah,
spot?
that's great if it's a visual, but what if there's something going on that's, over time and it's not so apparent?
Well,
That's another
in our condition, we didn't limit your inspection. You can make a random inspection on year 25, or year 24, or year 15, and say, I want to dig a hole here, and I want to dig a hole there. It's up. The inspection is your blank check, and you inspect however you want to inspect. Just like a building official who goes in and inspects for a zoning violation.
Is that covered by the, yeah, and it is covered by the owner, the applicant and the future owner will reimburse the town of its costs, so, okay. Yeah.
As long as we get that into the records.
Well, it's part of your
It's
condition,
part of the conditions.
but you can restate it.
Yeah.
That nice elaboration isn't identified in the condition.
You can restate it, but I don't have a problem with it. It's a condition, it's recorded.
All right, so we're good that we're going to hold on the plan. We're going to have further discussion, not we, but consultants are going to discuss
So
the amount. Now, how does it get started?
we'll have our consultant reach out to Crossman tomorrow.
We'll funnel everything through.
We'll you know what's best is we'll keep the town planner in the loop. So as Mr. Trumbley reaches out to Crossman Engineering, we'll do it via your town planner, so the town planner's in the loop.
Okay, excellent. Anything further? We're going to continue this to a date certain,
Yes,
and then if they need more time, they need more time.
correct.
Anything else to add? Okay. Planning board, motion to continue to January 8th.
Any opportunity for comment?
Why don't you let us get this motion out of the way, and sure, be happy to go to the public.
I'll make a motion to continue determining the reforestation bond until January
Planning,
the 8th. Plan and bond.
excellent, thank you. I have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I'm sorry, was there something, anyone in the public want to talk about this particular topic, or
Yeah.
it's sort of been put together?
These are just a couple of quick questions for the
Sure.
board to consider. Whoops, sorry. One question I had just listening was,
Excuse me.
I'm sorry, Eric Bidler, B-I-B-L-E-R. You want the address? B-I-B is in boy, L-E-R. So one question I'm just curious is the third party, I thought it was very interesting also that this Crossman, taking another look at the plan, came up with a lot of, whatever you want to call them, suggested changes, innovations, they would call them improvements or suggestions, I guess. So is the third party going to be able to make additional recommendations, or are they only going to focus on the money? Because that's one reason for not approving the plan tonight, because you might get an additional suggestion from your third engineer. But
Well,
you don't really have to answer that because you already settled the fact that you're getting both the plans.
I'll give you my thought. Other people can chime in. I don't see how you can focus on a number without looking at the plan.
Yeah.
So I can only presume, speculation on my part, that they're going to handle the plan at the same time.
Yeah.
Would seem logical.
I would think if he wants to recommend an improvement and three engineers all think it's a good idea. It's something to do. And the other thing I just, I wanted to say one thing about the possibility of environmental hazard from it. I just want to be clear, I'm no expert on environmental hazards. I compiled a lot of research from other people who are experts, and I tried to provide it to you. Some was news articles and some were studies and so forth. But I just want to be clear, I don't think the nature of the potential hazard from the solar panels is from them like degrading and dripping, onto the soil. I think the issue, there was, in that packet of materials I gave you, there were some researchers that performed some research that mimicked or replicated the sorts of conditions that you would get in landfills, or if they were broken, say in a storm, and came into contact with the ground and were there for a while. So I just want to say that I think the environmental hazard issue is really one that kind of revolves around abandonment, whether that's because of an event like in Texas. I think I mentioned at one time that there was a 6-month-old massive installation. There was a tornado that ripped through there. So you have the same thing with Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, I don't know whether that's been cleaned up or not, but one of the people I talked to was considering that job of cleaning them up, and part of the issues there were the cost of transportation and stuff. But we had a hurricane, went through and destroyed everything. So that's what brings the material into contact with the ground, and that's what creates the conditions where they lose their integrity and they could become a hazard. And that's why I have continually tried to identify the potential risk of abandonment at some point in time. And the risk of abandonment, I think, is directly, not to get into decommissioning, but it's directly proportional to whether or not the funds that have been set aside to take care of the problem are adequate, right? Because if the funds aren't adequate to the task, that's an issue. So my question here, though, that's related, and I hope you keep this in mind, is who pays the difference in the case of a shortfall? Because I'm confident that these 3 engineers can get together and develop a good plan, and that they can develop a pretty good handle on the costs of implementation, and then add some margin like 25%. I think in the PSES is what it says, no more than 125% of the fair and reasonable cost. And if you had to do it tomorrow, that would be totally fair. But the issue really is the cost of the reforestation 30 years from now is unknown and unknowable. And if the arrangement that you have is that the developer today is going to make a cash one-time payment into a cash escrow account, and that's going to be the limit of his liability, then the issue that he has is somebody has that residual risk, and I would argue that it's the town. So just theoretically, if you've got 30 years out there and you have an LLC that, congratulations on your certification, by the way, I see you finally recertified. So if you have an LLC that's actually certified to do business in the state of Rhode Island, it's 30 years from now, but its only asset is a 30-year-old solar panel, and they've given you an escrow for $400,000 and the reforestation is $800,000, there's a very high probability that they're just going to say, hey, you have my escrow, I'm not going to give you another dime, the rest is on you, and then you have a problem funding it. So the argument that I've tried to make is that one of the elements of the risk here, I don't think any municipality ever should accept that sort of residual risk from a business. Because I think that the appropriate form of the financial security, that's the word that's used in the PSES ordinance, section D. These are all financial securities. I think the appropriate form of the financial security ought to be that the developer should go pay a premium to a property and casualty company or some other bonding institution, and then you should get a contract that says that this single A rated or better insurance company is going to guarantee that that plan will be implemented. Then this financial transaction is between the developer and an insurance company that does that all day long. In the same way that they write policies to collect a premium and then repair the damage from a hurricane, it's the same thing. So I would really encourage this planning board, and I encourage the town council, that the form of the security that you should accept, and the only form is in the form of a bond like that, where they have to go out and get it bonded, and they have to negotiate the size of the premium, and you basically don't care you know, because you've got this contract, and what you want is the contract. You want the plan and you want a guarantee. And that gets to another aspect of the risk, and I told you I have a background in risk management, and there's two very large risks embedded in this deforestation plan, which not everybody would recognize, and the same thing is true of decommissioning. So one of them I just outlined, that the future cost is unknowable. You know, let's simplify that and just say that that somehow relates to the rate of inflation for, you know, deforestation costs, right? How fast, you know, will it double, will it triple in over 30 years? I don't know. You're going to accept funds, and you're going to have to invest them for the next 30 years. I mean, that's analogous to the same problem that, you know, the state of Rhode Island and every other state in the union has with pension funds, you know, where they collected money from people's paychecks and they thought they were going to invest it at a sufficiently high rate that 30 years from now when people retired, that would be funded. So you have two risks here. You have absolutely no one in this room knows any way of knowing what that reforestation cost is. We already did the deforestation, sorry. The reforestation cost is 30 years from now, but you also don't know the rate of return on your investment. And I've asked from this podium a few times, where's the money, who's investing in these escrow funds, and what's the rate of return, and who's making the decision about, you know, what to invest it in and how much risk to take. Is it invested in a CD? Is it invested in a bond fund? I don't even know what it is. I don't think you do either. But the risk is that in the rate at which these reforestation costs increase is 3%, and the rate on your investment is 1%, and at the end of the day, again, you've got this big gap that you can't fill. I don't think any municipality should take that risk. That's a business risk. You're letting them transfer it to you. If I were in their shoes, I would be overjoyed to negotiate a number, any number, whatever number works for my business model and leaves me with a profit at the end of the day, and I have absolute certainty I paid my escrow, I'm done. You've got the risk. I don't think you should take it. So I don't know whether you'll change gears this late in the game, but I would encourage you to look at the, again, the PSES ordinance, chapter 246. There's section D that relates to your duties, the review of the planning board and the duties that are assigned to you, and that's section D. And paragraph 6 or item 6 in section D discusses the whole issue of financial securities, right? The performance bond, the decommissioning, and the decommissioning is worded in such a way that it probably includes the reforestation. And in the PSES, and I can read the language if you want, but in the PSES, it says that the planning board makes the determination. The planning board has to approve a financial security, that's the word, and then it lists the different things it might be. It might be a cash escrow, it might be a bond, it might be, you know, different sorts of things that might satisfy the financial security. And it says that that financial security that mitigates that risk, this is a risk, that's what you're trying to do here tonight, the financial security that fulfills that element and mitigates that risk has to be in a form and in an amount that is acceptable to the planning board. So I would argue that you could reasonably and legally conclude a month from now, after this plan comes back, you'd be totally within your rights, and I would encourage you to do so, to say, love the plan, I have no problem, I think that's a reasonable expense, but if that's reasonable, I think that the developer ought to be able to go and present the same numbers to Aetna or Prudential or some other property and casualty company and come back in here and say, we're going to take that plan and we're going to make it a contract and we're going to pay our $463,000 to Aetna and Life and Casualty, and they're going to give the town of Hopkinton a contract that they will be here, whether it's a tornado in 2 years, or a hurricane in 15 years, or obsolescence in 25 years, or whatever it is. That's what I think you need. I think anything else, from a risk management standpoint, there's just, I mean, it's just a fact that somebody gets that risk of the residual risk. And if he doesn't have it, there's only one other person that has it, and it's you. And I don't think you should take it. I find that unacceptable as a risk management professional, but as a taxpayer too, and I don't think you need to take it. I think you got every right to refuse to take it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else, audience, want to be heard on this? Yes, ma'am.
Sharon Davis, Playground. I just have 4 questions for the reforestation, based on Crossman's report. In his conclusions on page 2, he says the plan should include future time for 1 round of vegetation control for free plantings to free the plantings from competing other vegetation. And my question is, what does that mean? Is he going to be using some kind of herbicide or something? And then the second thing, it says the process of releasing planted trees from other brush and tree saplings so they could get just enough of an edge over top and outcompete the other unintended vegetation. So I was going to ask, how are you going to do that? That's on that thing. And then on the proposed list, the new quote, I have some questions that I don't understand. Control of non-native invasive plants. Again, how are you going to do that? Repellex for deer and animal protection. Is that a chemical? That's a question. And soil monitoring and testing. That's apparently wasn't on the old quote, so I'm just wondering if that's going to be included. The other thing on the new one is the removal of installation of the tube stakes. That was listed separately as an additional item as opposed to just putting them in. And that removal at $77,000 is a lot, so you really do need to have more eyes looking at it. Okay. That's what I have for now.
Good, we'll see that those questions get to Crossman and we'll have answers. Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Yes.
Barbara Capalbo.
Could you repeat that?
Barbara Capalbo, C-A-P-A-L-B-O.
Thank you.
I think it's an interesting proposal from Mr. Bidler. But are you going to take this and expand it to all commercial enterprises? Every building, houses? Because we've had to pay to take houses down. We have empty commercial buildings that are abandoned or people go bankrupt. So are you going to expand this concept, which seems crucial that the taxpayers don't have to pay for it? But indeed, if you do it for one commercial enterprise, why are you not doing it for every commercial enterprise? Or every home? Because the town has been responsible in the past, and we have had to take it down. And commercially, when things are built, whether it's a nuclear power plant, or a railroad, the citizens take it down. So if you're going to do that idea, that you're looking into the future, which you cannot know, and it may not be 30 years, it might be 50 years, are you going to put a bond in? And if you do this for one commercial enterprise, why are you not doing it for all the rest? It's a question.
Thank you.
May I respond? Just because it's a question of the risk. I want to make sure you understand the risk.
The response is okay, but you've got to keep it brief.
Okay. So the answer to that is actually quite simple. when houses are built, railroads, and commercial buildings, there's no requirement that they be removed at the end of their useful life. This ordinance requires that these solar installations be decommissioned. As a matter of fact, I gather that Councilor Capalbo has forgotten the genesis of this entire solar program, where the core promise to every one of her constituents in every one of these projects was that they would, quote unquote, automatically revert from commercial zoning to residential zoning, and that they would be decommissioned, and that these would be land banks, and that we would have arguments over whether to plant mountain laurel or something else. But let's just be very clear about this. This was a central requirement of every single one of these, that they be decommissioned and reforested and restored. And we don't do that with commercial buildings and houses. They don't have that requirement.
Great, thank you. Anyone else in the audience on this topic? I see no hands. Okay, who's up? Moving on. New business 9. Discussion topic. Discussion of the status of project conditions set forth in the amended decision of the Town Council adopted at the October 22nd, 2018 Hopkinton Town Council meeting, and the Hopkinton Planning Board approval of May 1, 2019, pertaining to photovoltaic solar energy system, AP4 Lot 25310 Main Street, Maxim Hill LLC, care of Anthony Del Vicario applicant. I might impose on the planner to start with a brief overview.
Okay, in order to address this discussion here tonight, I would suggest that the board members go to their packet and pull out the amended decision that was provided by the solicitor to me, which includes 14 conditions imposed by the town council. And then also the decision by the planning board on approval of this, which has 24 conditions. And so to prepare for this discussion tonight, I had a thorough conversation on the phone this morning with Mr. Del Vicario, Kevin Moran, who is the engineer for green development, and David Russo, who is the engineer for the pre-engineering. And we went through each and every one of these conditions, a total of 38. And I can tell you that with the exception of the reforestation amount, that they have complied to the extent that they can with all of the conditions to date. Some of the conditions are conditions that have to be adhered to during the course of construction of the project, so actually that's an ongoing process. Some of the conditions you can't even monitor until after the project is built, such as the decibels and the sound. But to the extent that things that they could have complied with today, they've been complied with. They haven't, I can go through one by one if you like, but that's my summary. I can also go one step further. I monitor the project on a weekly basis. Crossman's been out there twice to look at the project, and Crossman has determined that all of the soil erosion, the sediment control measures have been installed. They have an 8-inch erosion control measure that goes around the entire perimeter. The only thing that hasn't been put in yet is the erosion control measures along the farm road. Farm road is complete today. I'll be out there tomorrow morning looking at it. But the erosion control has not been put on that yet. So when it is, and it should be put in there within a couple of days, Crossman will be out there again and issue another report. But the temporary sediment traps have not been installed yet out there, but Crossman recommends that they be probably one of the next things that happens out there. I talked to the construction manager this afternoon, and he says that yes, we have not done that yet. We are going to start that very, very soon. And before we do, we will notify Crossman to come down and take a look and verify where we're going to put them and how they're going to be constructed. So the project is being watched very, very carefully by the town right now. And I'd have to say they're in full compliance.
Jim, thank you very much. So this is a discussion element of our agenda. If there's anyone who doesn't know what Jim is talking about, don't know about the conditions, not familiar with the verbiage, now is the time for you to ask questions. Anyone, thoughts, questions? Don't walk out of here and then say, I don't know what they're talking about.
Before we go, can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
So there's one condition that I just want to make sure that it's clear, because we've seen a lot in the press and covering the town council. It's about the vegetative screening. Condition 19, as stated, and this is from our planning board in our attempt to do due diligence that we're often accused of not doing. We stated that at any time during the project construction, the town may inspect and or review the quality and effectiveness of the proposed vegetative screening, including in conjunction with the town's consultant for this purpose. In the event that the town makes the determination that said quality and or effectiveness of this screening is inadequate or fails to screen the project from any viewing perspective, the town may contract with a vegetative landscape architect, currently licensed or authorized to practice in the state of Rhode Island, and at the applicant's and or current project owner's expense to review said screening and to recommend solutions to rectify the inadequacy and or failure. So we have within our provisions relief if things have been cut down and they shouldn't have in order to have a barrier. I just want to make sure that that's clear to the public, that we were concerned about this project. We voted no initially. We did not recommend this project to go to the town. And so we were very, very concerned about the lack of vegetation that could occur during construction. And we put that in our recommendations. So there is relief for the public to know that it is stated within the conditions of approval of this plan. So that's all I want to state.
That's a good one, thank you very much. As long as, yeah, hold on for just a minute, I see two hands, I'll get to you.
How is that relief addressed?
Just hold on. I just want to mention that while we're on the topic of outlining our favorite conditions, I want to draw attention to the planning board's condition number 9 that states in part, all pertinent structures and equipment shall be screened from view by vegetation and joined or clustered to avoid adverse visual impacts to any abutting and or adjacent property that is residentially zoned, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's a condition that was imposed. Clearly, that condition doesn't really happen at this stage of the project's implementation, right? That happens at the end when the landscaping that's been approved has been put in place. Then, if the town finds that it's inadequate, condition 19?
Yeah, nice. But this is during construction.
So,
19 is during.
so then there's another condition that can kick in. I just want to, again, we had some thoughts about this when we made our motion to approve. I don't want you to think that we weren't thinking about the abutting property owners, weren't taking some measures to mitigate the impacts of the project. It happens to be one of my favorite conditions. So that said, there were two hands. Eric, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump over to this individual.
Sure, to number 9.
Come forward, please. Podium, name, address, so we know who you are. Thank you.
Steve Moffett, Diamond Hill Road. So condition number 19.
Yeah.
So that is, how is that concern addressed? So if at the end of the project or when it's built,
Yeah.
I mean, who do the residents go to? Who complains? Who steps in and says, you know what, we agree with the residents? I mean, is there arbitration? I mean, what type of situation does that bring
Good
up?
question. Let's get you an answer right now. Don't go anywhere.
Well, I'd like to say that, as you're probably aware, at previous public meetings, I've expressed an intent to work with the developer and neighboring property owners to beef up the landscaping around the properties where necessary. And I've taken the first step towards that way. I haven't told the applicant yet, but I reached out to the landscape architect of this project, Kevin Alberson, and I asked him, I told him that I haven't talked to his bosses yet, but I said, Kevin, I just want you to maybe put your thinking cap on a little bit, look at the landscape plan that has been put in place for the project, and see if we can embellish it a little bit more, particularly with respect to the Reynolds property. I think they're probably the most adversely impacted of all the people. And so I haven't really had a two-way conversation with Mr. Alberson yet, but I want to get the ball rolling now. And as number 19 says, during construction. So now is the time to start thinking about how we might make things better for the neighbors. So I am working on that.
And that would be a number to call at the end? I mean, it's something set up for butters. I mean, because, I mean, they shouldn't have to go searching for it. I mean, it should be considering the project. I mean, it's kind of elephant in the room. I mean, I'm sure there's been concerns after. But my next question would be in regards to these conditions. How many conditions were there? 33, I think you said?
There
34.
are conditions from the town council and conditions from
Whatever,
the planning
okay,
board.
okay.
Whatever-
So which conditions pertain to a building permit to be met for this whole project to go forward, right? Were there conditions that weren't met and a building permit was issued, kind of jumping the gun a little bit? Are those the same conditions you're looking at, planning board conditions, or are those town council
I
conditions?
just want to say, none
Are they
of these
different?
conditions have to be met prior to the issuance of a building permit.
Okay, but they all weren't, that's my question, they all weren't, I mean, that's,
Oh, they can't. So, screening, vegetation, those things
I'm
obviously
talking
happen
about
to
the
come to
current building permit. I mean, the kind of the talk is that there were a couple of conditions that were supposed to be met, and then.
I never said that. I never said that.
I'm not putting words in your mouth.
I'm telling you that none of those conditions have to be met
Okay,
in order to issue a building permit.
all right, then I must have my information mixed up, but I'm sure that there's some other people that may be able to clarify.
We have a number of projects, solar projects that have been built in this town,
Sure.
and we have given them an opportunity, as construction proceeds, to put in place the necessary bonds for decommissioning, et cetera.
Okay, so
Where our leverage is as a town is at the end of the day before they flip the switch on the thing. If those conditions are not met,
there's no flip switch.
there is no switch that is flipped,
Okay.
and it will not be. And that's the way we do, not just solar projects. I've been in this business for 20 years, and that's the way I've done every commercial project, okay? At the end of the day, before the building official goes out there and issues a certificate of occupancy for a building, generally the planner goes out with them, with the plan that was approved by the planning board, and the building official will ask the planner, has this project been built according to the plan and according to all of the conditions laid out by the planning board? The plan will make a determination, either yes or no. If they haven't been met, they don't get a CO. And they don't like that, they don't get COs.
But I'm not sure, my question was, there were no conditions that needed to be met in regards to decommissioning, reforestation bonds, any of that stuff, before a building permit was to be issued. That's my question, yes or no? That's all I want. I don't want a 5-minute explanation where you kind of, get up in front of your seat and get all the heat about it. It's just a yes or no question. Are there
I
conditions?
don't know how much more clear I could be. I said none of those
Okay, then
conditions have to be
no is your
met
answer.
before you issue a building permit.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Eric, you have your hand.
Yeah. I want to go through, you invited us to, Jim, you said you would go through the conditions individually. I don't want to go through all of them, but I have a couple I want to go through.
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, the ordinance, there was a zoning ordinance that approved, the property had to be rezoned from residential to commercial special in order for this project to take place. That was ordinance, the enabling ordinance for that was ordinances 259 and 60, I think. And 260 says, at the head of it, it's sort of the introductory part, this ordinance shall take effect upon passage subject to the fulfillment of all of the conditions set forth in the ordinance, as well as in Exhibit A incorporated herein. So just a few factual points, and I just want to have you confirm these. So the amount of the deforestation the reforestation escrow and the plan, those have not been met yet, correct? I mean, you haven't agreed to it, you haven't agreed to an amount, you haven't agreed to a plan. That condition has not been met, is that correct?
Well, what you just read doesn't, I didn't see the
I'll
word, the
read
term
it
building
again.
permit. I didn't see the
No, I
term
didn't
building
say,
permit.
I
in the
never
ordinance.
mentioned building permit, Jim. I'm just talking about
You
conditions.
said the ordinance doesn't take effect, right?
Okay, I'll read it again.
So until they comply with all of those conditions, the project doesn't go anywhere. They don't, the zone has not changed.
Right, okay, so the zone doesn't change, because that was exactly my point. Until they meet all the conditions, the ordinance does not take effect, and until the ordinance takes effect, it's residential property, correct? And it won't be commercial until the ordinance takes effect. That's the conversion point, that's the trigger, right? Well, that's what this says, isn't it? I mean, the ordinance is to change the zoning,
Well, wait a minute.
and the ordinance takes effect when the conditions are met.
The word "all" is in there as well, right? All of those conditions it is impossible for those conditions to be met. All of them.
I'm
You
not,
can't raise a fence 6 inches off the ground until you put a fence on the ground. That's one of the conditions. And you can't put a fence on the ground until you get a building permit. So all of those conditions, that language in and of itself is impossible to affect.
okay.
So let me cut to the chase. What's the question?
Well, I was going to ask which of these conditions have been met, and, you know, my next question was going to be, how is it that, there are also additional conditions in the PSES, in that section D. Just read the qualifying language. The prospective owner of the proposed PSES shall be the only party eligible, and forget that part. In addition to the requirement under the Development Plan Review Ordinance, the applicant shall provide the planning board with the following information, and then you've got this documentation, operation, maintenance plan. Most of this stuff is done, landscape plan, but then you get down to, you know, shall provide the planning board with a financial security. You know, and that's what we're talking about, and that includes decommissioning the other. So
Are you under the conditions?
no, I'm under the PSES ordinance that sets forth the things that must be accomplished by the developer with the planning board in section D of the PSES.
I'm sorry, I thought you asked to go through the conditions.
Well, I think these are conditions of approval, aren't they? Because the planning board doesn't approve the project until the conditions of the PSES ordinance are met also.
There are two sets of conditions that are up for discussion. There's the town council,
Maybe you don't
town
understand.
council conditions.
Yeah,
That's the amended decision from the public hearing on March 19th of 2018. And then there's the conditions set forth in the planning board decision, May 1st, 2019. Those are the conditions that I understood you had questions about.
Well, those are the
Let's not stray beyond those two documents.
okay. I guess the question I would pose then is, for the planning board, is are you able to approve a project that does not meet the requirements of the PSES as they're laid out for you? I mean, I think those are also conditions that must be satisfied, or you can't approve it, because the PSES ordinance instructs you to do all of these things. So I don't know how you could approve it without those. Those are just further conditions. But my point is this, Al, Chairman Diorio, my point is that I take Jim's point about, you know, you can't satisfy the condition that the fence is 6 inches off the ground until the fence is installed, okay? However, I think that these other conditions that are required to be satisfied in the ordinance, you know, should be conditions precedent. I mean, it actually says the ordinance can't take effect until they're satisfied. So I would argue that if you're going to issue a building permit before the planning board even knows they've gotten to the finish line, like you conceivably could decide to disagree on the decommissioning reserve and reforestation, you can be so far apart that the developer just decides he's not going to agree to your conditions and he just abandons the project, right? That could happen, which is why it seems logical that you shouldn't be putting the project in the ground until you've agreed to the form and the amount of the decommissioning reserve and the reforestation and all of these other things. Now, we are in a situation here where this ordinance has not taken effect yet. So that property is residential technically, and they are installing a commercial operation on a residential parcel because it's residential until the minute when the ordinance takes effect. And by everyone agrees, Jim just said, this ordinance hasn't taken effect yet. So they're out there making infiltration ponds and doing all the rest of this stuff because the building permit was prematurely issued, and you don't even know to this moment whether or not you're going to agree on the form of the decommissioning bond and so forth, and the reforestation bond.
So let's talk about the building permit, because this is not really what we do, right? We don't issue building permits. So let me make this clear. If somebody feels that a building permit was issued improperly, there is a procedure that you can follow to do this. It's not before the planning board. It's not before the town council. So if somebody feels that way, perhaps someone in this audience, I suggest that you get yourself down to the town clerk's office, get the form, fill it out, start the process. Simple as that. We don't have to have any further discussion about the building permit issue. It's not before this board. We don't make that decision. Jim doesn't make that decision. We clear? There is a process. It's laid out in the statutes. I urge you to follow that process. You must be an abutting property owner, I think is the only qualification.
I don't think it's of no consequence to your work, though, whether or not...
Didn't say that.
Okay. And then specifically on the condition for decommissioning, you know, the ordinance, you know, obviously these things go together. The ordinance 260, the enabling ordinance that the town council provided, that's one of the conditions that Jim is, of the 14, you know, that he has cited. You know, it says that it has to meet the planning board requirements. Now, the planning board process is set forth in the other ordinance, which is the solar ordinance, the PSES ordinance, chapter 246. And that states that, you know, under this financial security section, the security must be sufficient to cover the complete cost of removal in the event the town or its contractor must remove the PSES in a form and amount determined to be reasonable by the planning board. But in no event shall the security exceed 125% of the estimated cost of removal, if you went with the escrow option, obviously. The applicant shall submit a fully inclusive estimate of the costs associated with the removal prepared by a qualified engineer. Now that's a condition, a fully inclusive estimate of the costs associated with removal. I've been down to the town clerk's office. I've reviewed the hearing file at least 3 times. I have never once laid eyes on a fully inclusive estimate of the costs associated with removal. What I do have for you, which I think is instructive, I got 10 copies here. I have one for you too. Here is what purports to be a fully inclusive, and I want to apologize, by the way, to Ms. Williams, because I made a comment a couple of months ago about the planning board determining decommissioning reserves based, you know, with no foundation. And I didn't know about this document at the time. This document, I think, just turned up in the wrong place, or I received it, you know, when I noticed something else in a minute. And this is what purports to be a fully inclusive itemization of the costs of decommissioning, but this is for the Alton Bradford Road project, right? You should have received something like this for Maxon Hill to satisfy the PSES ordinance. But the reason I think this is a cautionary tale is what I've attached to it is, you know, Crossman Engineering actually looked at this. I mean, looked at it, meaning glanced at it, but I don't think they really did a lot of due diligence themselves on what some of these cost components were. And the thing that sticks out here is that the line item, this is $316,000 for about a 14 megawatt project. And I think you're talking a little less than 12, this is slightly larger. So this is $316,000, and the line item for salvage and disposal of solar panels is $28,000, right? And then there's a notation that it assumes that the panels will be hauled off with the salvage. The salvage is the aluminum frames of the racks. So there's no shipping cost associated with these panels. They're estimated to be 50 pounds each, and there's a $28,000 disposal cost to put them in the landfill. So first of all, I don't know whether you can put them in a landfill in Rhode Island today, whether that's legal or not. It's not going to be legal in 10 years or 25 years, I can tell you that. It's already outlawed in places like numerous states, California, Europe, other places. The toxicity of the panels that I'm not a scientist, but I gave you information on this, so that the toxicity occurs in landfill-like conditions, and this has now been researched and it's recognized, right? So, and because of the sheer volume of solar panels that need to be disposed of, and you're not going to be able to put them in a regular landfill. There's a 100-page study from the European Commission that I gave you too, that basically suggests that's not going to be a disposal option. Now, as you know, I contacted 5 recyclers recommended by the Solar Energy Industry Association, 5 recyclers, and determined that based on the weight or based on the per panel cost and based on the shipping cost, a fair estimate for the just the recycling and the shipping is about $30 a panel, in that neighborhood. We're talking about 30 or 32,000 panels here, depending on what the wattage is per individual panel. So that's about, $900,000 or $1 million. The reason I'm raising that is, yes, you had this. Yes, you thought it was reasonable. If I had seen this 2 years ago, I might have thought the same thing, But now we know better, and I think that, certainly this town wants to be in the position of insisting as part of the bargain here that the solar operator, dispose of these panels responsibly, and ought to stipulate that they be recycled. And I don't think Crossman knows that cost. I'm sure they can find out, but shipping and recycling is probably more on the order of $1 million. Now, we go back to, I don't want to get into a big discussion about the building permit, but to my reading of the PSE ordinance, which says that the form and the amount and the conditions have to be acceptable to the planning board. And there's actually language in the ordinance, even though they did say in the ordinance that at the time the town council considered $264,500 to be fair and reasonable. The ordinance, and now I'm talking about the other ordinance, 260, the enabling ordinance, also does say and satisfy the requirements of the planning board. And the requirements of the planning board are very simply to find that the form and the amount is acceptable. So, you're going to have to, I think certainly it's incumbent upon this board to stop ignoring the decommissioning issue as if it's a settled point. At the very least, if you're going to accept a number like $264,000 that I think probably most of you are convinced is grossly inadequate, I think you ought to vote on it to reflect your consensus of that point. But I don't think it's a settled point, and I think the money difference between you and the developer, this reforestation reserve, is chump change. You're talking about a difference of $300,000 or $400,000. You may be talking about a difference of $1.5 million on decommissioning. So again, I'm looking at this through my lens of, forget about the legalities of the building permit and how to install it and stuff. If I were sitting on the planning board and I were trying to grapple with these very difficult issues of what is the appropriate form of the guarantee and what's the appropriate amount and everything, I would want to be very strict about ensuring that the that the building inspector doesn't issue a permit and the developer doesn't start erecting panels until I've had an opportunity to address that and protect the taxpayers of the town. That's the only point I'm making. That's why I think the fact that it's out of order is very, very relevant, and we have lots of these projects. And I wouldn't want to see this process replicated of seeing building permits issued months before you've made your approval certain on these items.
I think we've covered the building permit issue. Anyone else in the audience this evening? Yes.
I want to ask some of the questions on the conditions. In the letter that has 14 conditions, I want to look at number 5. It says, the petitioner shall prepare and submit to the planning board for approval a reasonable plan designed to sustain the native animal species in and around the solar array facility during its construction and its operation until the facility's closure. So my question is, what is the plan during construction to sustain the native animal species? Aren't they being driven out right now?
Jim, do you have such a plan?
Here, this document right here was prepared by Natural Resource Services, Scott Rabdu. And on the first page of it, the plan acknowledges that the town of Hopkinton provided the applicant with the following condition in the town's approval for the proposed construction. And the condition is exactly what we just read. And so this report, 9-page report, is their way of addressing that condition.
Can you tell me how they're doing it? Can you summarize or something? I mean, that's not fair. That's not fair to put one in the spot. But I'll read it.
Because the number, yes,
I'll read
I'll provide you with a copy.
I don't get a copy of that.
Also, number 14 says the applicant will allow the town to purchase metered credits in order to lower its electricity costs. Is that really going to happen?
I think I should direct the question to the applicant.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. Here's the copy.
Thank you. Do you know? That was my how and when on that one. Okay. Now I want to go to the one that's in number 1, it says, the applicant has received an assurance that such an interconnection approval will be given by National Grid at the appropriate time. My question is, how do you define assurance? And what kind of documentation are you going to get? Or, originally, the ordinance said that you had final approval from National Grid. And the amendment actually said, oh, you can't possibly have final approval until you build it. So you said to change it to that you had assurance from National Grid that you would get the approval at the appropriate time. And my question is, was that assurance in writing? That's basically,
Yes.
Was it? Okay.
They have an interconnection service agreement with National Grid in place, and based upon the feasibility study they did for the project. You're never going to get final approval until a project is built and inspected by National Grid. They do a test. They do a test of the system.
Okay.
Then you get final approval.
Number 7, it says during the site preparation and installation stages of the construction of the solar array, such work shall be performed only during the Monday through Friday work week and only between the hours of 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. And my question is, do we have penalties for them not meeting any, for that one or any other condition if they don't meet it? Do we have any kind of penalties built in? It doesn't seem like there's no penalties built in to the ordinance. It's not.
That's a point that I emphasize every time I get down there and talk with them. And they, for the most part, I think they've been adhering to it. I have had a couple of complaints from people in the neighborhood that they've expanded beyond those hours, but for the most part, they are working within those hours. Sometimes you get a mechanic that comes out who's a little bit over anxious and might start at 7:30 or something, working on a truck, or put oil in a truck or something like that. But we, every time I get down there, I emphasize the point, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday.
But in general, there's no penalties built into these ordinances?
Wouldn't it flip to the zoning ordinance about violations of ordinances?
Well, I mean, you're gonna have to be, first of all, we're gonna have to be made aware of it by somebody. Now, I think people have been advised in the past to call the police just to get something written up. So I guess once it's written up by the police and the documentation would probably go to the building and zoning official for some sort of action. I suppose we could attempt to take some kind of action, but again, in practice, is that something that you really want to do? Is the cost of going to war worth it rather than just telling them, hey, listen, giving them a reminder, right?
Well,
I don't know, that's not for me to decide.
Right. But I also have a question for the applicant. There's a performance bond between, I guess, the owner and the person who's actually building it? That $270,000 performance bond?
Before the building permit was issued, they posted a performance bond of $270,000
Okay,
to
so
ensure completion
what
of the
is
project.
that for?
To ensure completion of the project, that the project is built according to the plan.
And our either town rep or you, when you're during the construction phase, you're the one who's monitoring to make sure they do build? I'm not sure.
Absolutely, I have Crossman
Okay.
out there working,
That's okay.
every week they're out here.
Okay.
I have 2 written reports from them already. So yeah, we are monitoring it. And again, that's a condition that was imposed by the planning board, that performance bond. The planning board wanted to have a bond in place to make sure that the plans got implemented.
Okay. The next question I have is, did Rhode Island Renewable Solar Energy LLC, did you sell to 310 Main Street? Am I getting them mixed up? So, yeah, you said you represent.
Hopkinton.
True, but,
Today.
Get the check.
Today,
no, I'm
That's
just,
a legal question.
I'm just trying to
The judge
understand.
to decide that.
I'm just trying to understand how ownership and responsibility travels from the developer as the applicant to the person who's doing the building,
Yeah, that's a very good
and
question.
who the owner, and does the owner keep
Absolutely. Through the chair. if I may.
responsibility?
Just stay away from the legal stuff and
Yeah.
No, I'm
answer the
just
question, please do
process.
it.
It's not essentially a legal response. The approval and all of the conditions and all of the plans that are recorded run with the land. So it's irrelevant who the owner of the land is. It's irrelevant because it's part of the approval. If I buy a property that's zone C2 and you buy a property that's in zone C2, we're subject to the same approvals, subject to the same obligations under a C2 zone. The same thing with these approvals. So the point is that anyone can own this project. They're still obligated to follow the same points, the same conditions, the same obligations of all the landlords. It's irrelevant.
Well, from a town's point of view, in terms of keeping track of things, I kind of would like to know when those changes happen.
But you do.
And know
but
who
the
they
town-
are, so that the town can make sure that they're talking to the next person who bought it or whatever. We said it goes with the land, but if we don't even know who owns the land or who has leased it or whatever, and as those changes happen, we're in the dark.
You're not.
Well, I think we're in the dark, and I think we need to have, I think that's a tightening up. That's all I'm saying, in general.
Oh.
But we need to have some kind of meeting when those kind of changes happen with the town. That's a town rep or with the town, so that we know over time, especially if this is gonna happen over 30 years. I mean, I think we need to
So every
know.
time there's a change in ownership, it's
Mhm.
recorded in the land evidence records. And a lease is also recorded in the land evidence records. So that information is controlled not by me or anyone, it's controlled by the town specifically. So the town clerk knows, and that's because when they want to issue a tax bill, they find you. And so they have the knowledge, they have the ability to determine who's the recorded owner of the property and who's the lessee of the property.
So when these changes happen, then we need to internally make sure that the town clerk makes everyone aware in our town. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm just saying that it's recorded in the evidence record. I don't know what process that the town invokes.
All right.
There's no secret to this. It's not.
No, I just
there's
want to know
there's no
process, and I just think,
conspiracy.
I think we need to be in control. That's,
You're
this is
the
a
town.
long-term thing, you know? And I think that, for me, being new, I think a lot of things happen. They may happen in an orderly manner. The problem is that the town is not used to keeping track of these things. These solar projects are new for us, and they have a lot of complicated things, and they're processed and they're managed in a complicated way, and I just think that we ought to be clear, everyone should know, the town council, the planning board, the planner department, the zoning, all of us should know what's happening, and that's just my point. Okay, on the one that has 24 conditions, when you pointed out number 9 about that there was going to be a redress for the abutters, and I guess you sort of said that this is going to happen at the end. And my question was, why did they have to take them down if they're going to put up vegetation? Why couldn't we have coordinated a certain amount of feet and made the person who was taking down the trees, just don't take that part down? And I don't understand why, especially, 15 feet is from an abutter is that's just really small to me. And I appreciate that Jim's going to be working with the landscape architect to make it better at the end. I just kind of question why we had to take it all the way down to have to put it back up. So that was one. About the performance bond. Do we have a copy of that? Jim, we have a copy of that?
Yes.
All right. And I think I got that one. That was it, thank you.
Anyone else in the audience? Questions? Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I just had a couple of questions. When I was listening to, my name is Jim Donnelly, I'm an attorney from Wakefield.
Can I ask that you identify who he represents?
It's the old case of,
That's fair.
common law case, Whiskey Gambler.
You represent me?
Whoever's name.
Let's try not to
It's good for the.
go down that path, right? Listen, I understand you guys are on, before you get started, I know you people are on opposite sides of this argument.
Yeah.
I am not a judge.
No, I'm
So,
not.
please respect whatever ethical and procedural elements you are obligated to follow here. Don't make me come out of my seat on this.
I just had a couple of questions. I'm not making any representations. When I was listening, Mr. Lanfear said something about we roll along and we determine the decommissioning costs in projects. And when you've got, as Eric said, the question came up because you've got the ordinance that says this is for decommissioning. That's not in effect yet. You've got 246, which was enacted back in 2016, that says this is what you got to do for every one of it's applicable to anything that's built after this time, and it says that you're the guys that determine the amount of decommissioning, etc., in a form and in an amount that you determine. how do you view that? Is that still, just my question is that still an open question to you?
That's incorrect. That's incorrect. That's a mischaracterization of what the statute is and what the ordinance is. So that's not correct.
Okay, well, I've got copies of everything, because I've told you before, I don't want you to believe me, okay? I ask you to believe your own eyes. And I'll give you all the copies of both 260, 246 that was in effect. And it says, this is your determining fee. That's what it says.
So you can give us whatever you'd like.
So I will,
You
but I
can
just
talk- You can talk at us, but under advice of counsel, not going to get any feedback from us on this particular topic.
Oh, okay, well then I don't have anything further to say. I'll collate these and I'll give them out to you. Just so you can-
What was the question?
My question was, as a board, when you say you've got 14 conditions from the ordinance and you've got additional 24 that you've got, do you intend in the future to look at the decommissioning according to the PSES ordinance, or is this something you're not going to address and just leave it with the original ordinance? 260.
I'm just going to object for the record. It's speculation. You're not, just so the record is
Let me try and navigate my way through this. okay?
Because I was just not going to say that we're in court, that I didn't object.
Okay, so we have your question. We'll get you an answer.
Okay,
Won't be tonight.
that's all I wanted to know. That's all I wanted to know.
Good, thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Yes, sir.
Well, my name's Steve Dolce. I live at 114 Maxon Hill Road, directly across the street from this project. And I'm at this project every single day. It concerns me greatly. I just wanted you to know that I'm not there once a week, I'm there every day. So I can see the progress that they're making, or the progress that they're not making. And secondly, I was just wondering, how do I get my hands on those conditions? The 34 conditions from the town council and 12 conditions from the...
I'd be happy to give you,
I just go to your office and pick them up?
or I can email it to you.
All right.
You can have mine if you
All
like.
right, again.
Oh, thank you. So they're open or just, some of them?
14 and 24.
14, 24? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else this evening? Okay, see no hands. Absolutely.
I know I'm coming into this kind of in the middle of this project, but I was just wondering why, for this project, we don't have an itemized decommissioning list the way that the planning board got for Alton Bradford.
So decommissioning is not before the planning board.
It was decided before, but it's not.
So it's handed to us as a condition.
Condition that we don't weigh in on it.
The commission is a fixed item. The question before us, we will talk about with legal rules. Do we have any authority? That's not a discussion topic for this evening. One that I will get some of. But that's how it came to be. Not that we like it, but our course from there.
I can just be specific. As I just said, the applicant did post a performance bond for the project, and they also gave us the decommissioning check, $264,500. So we have both of them. I think the applicant's ready to give us some sort of a fee at some point for reforestation. So those are the big conditions that we'd like to see, put in place as soon as we get in place.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Sorry, I'm not going to dig in too deeply into this, but, and I hesitate to bring this up as a hypothetical because I don't want to suggest anything, but if that's the case, this was handed down from the town council, the conditions of decommissioning, and we're sorting out whether or not this board can weigh in on it. What is preventing the town council from taking any element of a project, and that is normally the purview of the planning board, and specifying it as a condition in an ordinance and essentially erasing the planning board's input from that issue.
The law.
No, that's not correct.
So,
That's
yeah,
not
let's not go
Let's,
there.
don't.
So, listen, the town council just did this, okay? I'm not gonna step in, I don't know if I was there at that hearing, but they did what I'm sure they thought was in everyone's best interest. I don't know if rebuttal testimony was offered about that number, I don't know any of those details. What I have done is I have respectfully requested that the town council not do that in the future. Other than that, I don't know what else I can do about things that happened in the past.
Just want to say that town councils can, and you know that they have done it on many occasions for many different projects, attach conditions to a rezone. It's something that they do quite frequently.
And rightfully so. I think the question, though, and please don't let me misconstrue, is conditions that perhaps are more within the purview of the planning board should probably be left to the planning board. We happen to think that was one thing, but again, things that happened in the past. Okay, is there anything else on this particular topic that we need to cover this evening? Otherwise, I think we'll...
Are you going to have a decommissioning workshop
So how
on
about...
December 11th or
How
not?
about if we clear this topic because they're not related, and then we will answer that question. We all good on this one, Eric?
Well, I do have a question on some of the information Jim just provided, because I thought I heard you say that you're going to discuss decommissioning at a later date in possibly executive session. I don't know what you meant by that. But you know, with further input from council, and again, Jim said he got a check for $264,500. It seems to me it's inappropriate to cash that check until you come to the point where you determine that that's what you're going to accept as a reserve. How do you do that first?
It's in the ordinance, he can't change it. That's it.
That's a point of contention.
I'm
Well-
going to leave the cashing of the check to somebody else. That's way above my
Yeah,
pay grade.
yeah.
Council has to work this out. That's the discussion that I alluded to. We're not really going to go much further than that. Okay. We're done on this issue, right?
Just on that one last comment that they often put the conditions on things. These are for you folks to share the actual statute that does that. And you can look at the statute and you can see what kind of conditions we put on, and you all can read. And I know that you will find that practically none of the conditions that the council put on are conditions that are allowed by law, but it's just for your edification.
Okay, very good, thank you. All right, so that's the end of that discussion item. Moving on to the next topic. Solicitor's report.
Oh, thanks.
Planners report. Correspondence and updates. Public comment. I see none. Before we get to the date of the next regular meeting, we do have to cover the topic of our upcoming workshop. I know it's not on the agenda. I am probably bad on my part, but we have to decide whether we're going to do it next Wednesday or whether we think we need a little bit more time. You folks care to weigh in?
Tell me what the topic of the workshop is in
Decommissioning.
In general.
Yes. So I've been acquiring a little bit of data. I have not had a chance to compile it and put it into any kind of cogent format, so I would be suggesting I need a little bit more time.
I agree. I think it's a big enough topic, it's worth collecting more information and thinking carefully about what we want to get out of it. I mean, this is our opportunity to learn about decommissioning, right? So I think,
We have subject matter experts.
right, I think we should have subject matter experts.
We're good on that? Can we agree to talk about setting a date at our January 8th meeting, or to get over the holidays, if that's okay? Jim, could we have that on the agenda just to target the next workshop date? Okay, so it sounds like the consensus is no workshop next Wednesday. It was a target. Sounds like we'd like a little bit more time to put something together. Okay. Date of our next regular meeting, everybody okay with January 8th? Anything that rightfully can come before